Today's chat is brought to you by, well, all of your support. Through the patronage you provide the Focus Fire chat team through Podbean's crowdfunding, we are able to provide you with the weekly podcast as well as the website and other aspects of Focus Fire chat. If you have any interest in becoming a patron of the FFC, please be sure to visit our website and click on the support link. Even a single dollar helps, and for those of you who are already patrons, thank you again for your generosity. You may have heard the whispers of guardians gathering in the shadows, exploring the mysteries of this world and the worlds which surround us. We are all in search of truth. Sometimes we need to focus that search, focus that fire. And so we come together. Join us. Join the discussion. Welcome to Focused Fire Chat. Welcome back for episode 158 of Focus Fire Chat, recorded live on February 15th over on twitch.tv/FocusFireChat. As always, want to give a big shout out to our live chat here with us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us once again. Our topic for tonight's episode is going to be a look at morality of a guardian. But first, let's run through a quick introduction of those on the show for tonight. As always, this is your host, Blue Crew 86. Next up, we have our own master of social media, the one and only Green-Eyed Music Lover. Green, I hope you're doing well. How's the week treated you so far?
Good. It's just been another week of chaos and house planning and looking at paint and picking out flooring and figuring out how to tear up carpet, which we haven't gotten in the house, guys. Just letting you know, we're not in the house. We're just planning everything you could possibly plan before we get even the keys.
Yeah, to be fair, you probably want to tear the carpet up before you get into the house, though.
Oh, yeah. That's what we're actually planning on doing. We sign on the 28th of this month, and then we gave ourselves a 2-week leeway between the lease going up here where we're at currently and going into the new house. So we plan on getting in there the first weekend, tearing all the carpet out, and putting kills down on every surface we can possibly cover, because it was a 3-bedroom condo with 7 people living there. So, and 5 of them were children. So we're gonna fix some things.
Just
a lot of things.
Yeah, I was about to say.
A lot of things.
Oh, well, I know. I know that this week we didn't have a question for the community because the how would we best say this? The tenuousness of this week's topic. So we'll just run through our standard intro notes and then we're gonna jump right into it. In our last episode of Focus Fire Chat, we discussed the Forsaken Prince lore book. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to rate and, if you can, leave us a written review on iTunes or comment on the episodes on Podbean or whichever podcasting app you use to enjoy podcasts. Reviews are extremely helpful as they not only let us know what we can do better, but help continue to expand the FFC family, which allows more and more perspectives to be heard. To those of you who have already taken the time to leave us a review, thank you. As many of you already know, Focus Fire Chat is a cross-community gathering where the intent is to offer a week-long, in-depth view of a particular subject from within the lore of Destiny and other games. This chat begins every Tuesday morning and runs until the following Tuesday, with topics decided by the group via a poll that begins every Friday and ends on the Tuesday morning of the new chat. Every Friday at around 10 p.m. Central, we get together to stream a high-level summary of the previous week's chat for those who are unable to participate. If you're a fan of lore in all its various forms, be sure to also check out thelorenetwork.com, where you can find a wide variety of some amazing content that covers a number of different titles and mediums. This will also be the new home for the Focus Fire Chat episode note archives and articles going forward. Our next chat is going to be a discussion on the Book of Unmaking. As usual, our plan is to set aside next week's discussion for a summarization of the extra lore content for February, Near. With all that being said, here's Green with a high-level summary of tonight's topic.
Morality speaks of a system of behavior in regards to standards of right or wrong behavior. The word carries the concepts of moral standards, moral responsibility, and moral identity. Within the game, there has been a continued blurring of the lines when it comes to the idea of right and wrong, pushing our character to dive deeper into their own emotional and moral resolve. Our own moral identity has been continually challenged with the loss of the speaker and the current division within the Vanguard. And our moral responsibility and moral compass have ever evolved as our characters have been challenged to make difficult decisions. Granted, those decisions were made for us, but hey, what can you do?
Before we jump into the information and thoughts that the community had about the morality of a guardian, however, let's have a quick chat about this week's Lost Lore. So this week for Lost Lore, I actually wanted to talk about, I was originally planning on talking about the difference between morality and ethics, which I think actually Pins did a really good job on the Halo episode, if you guys haven't had a chance to listen to that one. But I was mentioning to Green, right before I got on tonight, I was looking up some, it's basically called Current Anthropology. It's a publication, and the University of Oxford actually just published a paper talking about morality of cooperation, and it was a really interesting study that they've been doing for, they've been working on this thing for several years. And basically what they did was they looked at about 60 different cultures around the world and throughout various points in time, and just, it's like over 600,000 texts that they examined and just looked at all this stuff, and it was published in February of 2019, so really it was really just recently. And what they basically found, and this is going to be really relevant I think to the conversation tonight, is that, and this is a quote from Dr. Curry, who is the lead researcher there, and he said, "People everywhere face a similar set of social problems and use a similar set of moral rules to solve them. As predicted, these 7 moral rules appear to be universal across cultures. Everyone, everywhere, shares a common moral code. All agree cooperating, promoting the common good is the right thing to do." And so that's the end quote. And so these 7 universal moral rules that they kind of found, and I'm gonna kind of explain these also after I read them off here. So the first one was helping your family. The second one is helping your group. The third one is returning favors. Fourth is be brave. Fifth is defer to superiors. The sixth was divide resources fairly, and the seventh was respect others' property. So these are the 7 universal moral rules that in all the 60 cultures that they looked into, these behaviors were always present and always considered good. Now, the thing to keep in mind, the findings, really, they divided the findings into 3 major things. The first one was that, like I just said, all these behaviors were all present and all of them were considered morally good. The second thing was that while most of these rules were present in most of these rules were present in the societies, none of the societies held any counterexamples. And what that means is that none of the societies viewed any of these rules as morally bad. So there was nothing where those 7 were considered to be not a good thing to achieve. And the morals were observed equally across all cultures. However, there is a differentiation that while all values were present, the priority was different in the different cultures. So one culture might have, one culture might be a more warlike culture, and they would be more obviously more likely to focus on being brave and deferring to superiors and dividing the resources earned through battle fairly. Whereas a culture that is hunter gatherer or a wandering hunter culture would be more of aligned with helping family or helping group and respecting others' property. Then you have the difference between individualistic and communal societies. They're obviously going to have different views. But the thing is that even though these different moral rules have different priorities within these cultures, all 7 were always there. And so the morality it's called the morality as cooperation theory. There's 4 primary things in here. It's kin selection, mutualism, social exchange, and conflict resolution. Those are the 4 things that kind of break up this type of concept of what is morally correct and really wrong. And the kin selection is really the part that explains where we get the sense of helping your family. It explains the sense of having a special duty to care for over our family, and why we actually, to kind of be blunt, why a lot of cultures abhor the concept of incest. This is where that sense of that as being wrong comes from. The second one is mutualism. And that is going to be talking about helping your group. And it explains why we form groups and coalitions because of the strength in numbers concept. Why most people will value unity, solidarity, and even loyalty. That's what mutualism is really all about. And then social exchange is dealing with returning of favors. So this explains why we trust others, why we reciprocate favors, why you feel guilt and gratitude guilt or gratitude in a social situation, why you have a social urging to make amends and forgive even different transgressions against you. And then finally, the conflict resolution. And honestly, when it comes to morality as a social construct and morality as cooperation, you're going to see a lot of focus on conflict resolution. Conflict resolution in this particular model explains pretty much everything else. So be brave, deferring to superiors and resources, as well as respecting others' property. And so conflict resolution within the morality as cooperation theory explains why we engage in displays of prowess, which is how you can explain bravery and generosity in a culture, why you defer to superiors, why we divide resources fairly, and even how, or explains how and why we put so much emphasis on recognizing prior ownership of an item. And this is very important, very, very polarizing cultures such as the individualistic or even the communal, not so much, but the individualistic societies will put a lot of weight on respect others' property because they want their property respected. So it's kind of a recognition there. This particular paper is called "Is It Good to Cooperate? Testing the Theory of Morality as Cooperation in 60 Societies," and it's actually available in, I believe, this iteration of Current Anthropology. And that actually leads me into the next point. So that was morality as cooperation within a social situation. The next thing that I want to kind of get everyone in the mindset of is the concept of moral judgments, because that's going to be a big topic for, I think, tonight. I know Green has promised to be my devil's advocate for this whole conversation. Yes. So the concept of moral judgment. This is from Dr. Anir Govrin. This was a paper a book actually that he published in 2018 called "Ethics and Attachment: How We Make Moral Judgments." And I'm just going to actually read this a couple series of quotes here that really kind of summarize what his explanation is. And I'll talk about my thoughts on it after I get done. So he says, at their core, moral judgments require us to judge between two parties. Moreover, moral judgments are not limited to judging one isolated component of a moral situation, such as intentionality or the extent of harm covered or caused, but rather require an assessment of an entire relationship that is held up to our prior expectations of how relationships of this type should be handled. One of the most important factors in judging relations is assessing the asymmetry of power between the parties. Within the dyad, we identify relations between two sides: strong, weak, dependent, independent, helpless, in control. We have a range of expectations as to how the strong party in a dyad should and should not behave towards the weak side. We perceive moral failure when, as observers, we believe that the conduct of the strong towards the weak has violated our expectations. This social cognition is universal. We always expect the strong to protect the weak, or at least cause him no harm. This expectation stands behind every person's moral judgment in every culture. However, even though the cognitive calculation is universal, our relations towards each of the sides and sympathy and hostility we feel towards them constitute an unstable and variable set of factors that differ from person to person and from culture to culture. Thus, suffering per se is not enough to elicit empathy without some attachment to the victim. So, and he goes on actually to explain that the predominant difference that you see with expectations of the strong towards the weak is very, very strongly influenced by the individual's first year of life, because of the idea that at that point in time, we are the weak party and everything else is the strong party. And so how the strong enacts or acts upon us kind of flavors how we expect things to be in our future. Now, I don't necessarily agree 100% with what he's saying. I get where he's coming from. I like the idea that real quick, dyad is a system of two. So you have opposed like light and dark, white and black. That's what a dyad is. There's a huge etymology. Yeah, there's a huge etymology there, but ultimately it's dyad. So you have strong, weak. That's where that concept comes from. I think that's a very gross oversimplification of morality. But at the same time, and I was actually talking to my wife a little bit before this. At the same time, that is also a very strong theme in what's called contemporary dentology, which we'll get into here when I get into the introduction a little bit, because the other thing that we need to keep in mind is that morality is one of these things that has been around for a long time. It's definitely been around ever since really anybody got beyond the let's just, eat and get safe mentality.
Well, I mean, it's any sort of group mentality, because morality helps guide a group into a social order.
Right. Well, and actually that's kind of a good segue, if you will, into what is morality. What specific, when we say morality specifically, what we have to keep in mind is morality is often defined as a particular system of values and principles of conduct. So kind of what Green's saying right there is, and it's a particular system or principle, especially that is held by a specific person or even a society. So this can be simplified into the statement of morality being the extent to which an action is right or wrong. However,
so can I have you right next to that contrast it with what ethics is versus morality?
So this is where I kind of hesitate, because ethics is, it's like, what's the difference between a square and a rectangle? Ethics is really the branch of. Let me grab my note.
Yeah, because there's always the confusion between ethics and morality taking place, even though they are super similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah, so a lot of people will say that morality is influenced by society, culture, and or religion, whereas ethics are influenced by professional fields and organizations.
Morality doesn't have to be tied to religion.
It does not. It does not. And actually, there is another anthropologist wrote a very interesting article, I believe it was a couple months ago.
Even C.S. Lewis talked about that aspect.
Right. Well, but there's a article that was recently published about how the decline in religious
structure,
not structure, but loyalty, I guess it's not loyalty, but like religious rigor. Even though that's declining in the current day, for all intents and purposes, the moral code of society has not degraded in the same sense. And the reason being is that exactly what you're saying there, Green, is like, so there is, this is kind of getting ahead of us a little bit, but there is a particular deontological ethics theory called divine command theory that does have very specific tie-ins to religion that is there, but to be blunt, it's only one theory. And actually a lot of the theories that I really I ascribe to are more, I don't want to call them secular, but they're not religious at all. They
social based.
Yeah. social contract, I guess, maybe. Though I feel dirty saying that, because there's connotations with that, with Lockean concepts. But it's let me explain ethics real quick, and then I'm going to come back to that, because it is a very good point that you have. My point there was that morality is much more about it's about society. And so religion is often ascribed to a more social nature or cultural nature. And I know that's a very gross oversimplification of all three of those items, but that's where morality comes from. Whereas ethics you're going to be more determined by ethics. Ethics are more focused on structured professional expectations, organizations within those societies. The thing about ethics is that they deal with morality. So the primary way to differentiate is basically, is the matter related to a professional work? So ethic is, morality is not. And is the matter a uniform application? So something like ethics would be uniform. It doesn't matter what happens, where it's happening, it's going to be applied the same, whereas morals will basically vary according to different cultures and religions, right? Mm-hmm. So, and you see this a lot within the difference between, the East and the West civilizations. There's a lot, which is going back to that piece about the morality as cooperation. That was one of the big interesting things, was that those 7 truths were found in every culture. Regardless, it wasn't just the Western culture, it wasn't just Eastern culture, it was every culture had those 7 truths, which was a really, that has major ramifications for the schools of philosophy called ethics, which brings me to the actual definition of ethics. Ethics is basically the branch of philosophy that studies and addresses questions of morality. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. So ethics, morality, it's like saying morality is like a 50,000 foot view. Ethics is like a 45,000 foot view. It's about as high, but it's slightly more focused, because ethics is focusing on what is moral, whereas morality is kind of focused on what is right and wrong, and so from a philosophical point of view, ethics is looking at it, well, the way we determine what is right and wrong, we have to kind of understand why it's right and wrong. That gets into a whole slew of different theories, which is kind of where, going back to Green, your question about, or your statement about religion, is 100% on the mark. One of those theories I mentioned is the divine command theory. Now, the divine command theory is... It falls within what's called normative. So this might get a little messy. There's a branch within ethics. So ethics is a school of philosophy. There's a branch within that is called normative ethics. This branch is basically a branch of the philosophical ethics that examines the set of questions which arise when considering how one ought to act morally. And this particular branch is more of a prescriptive system. It's not a descriptive system, because where other branches will focus on the empirical investigations of people's moral beliefs, this one is actually looking at the standards for the rightness and wrongness of an action. And one of those theories, it's what's called deontology. Mm-hmm. Deontology is a particular theory, or a group of theories, really. Deontological ethics, which is also deontology, is really focused on the morality of an action, and whether that morality of an action should be based on whether the action itself is right or wrong under a series of rules, or if how you consider it. Should it be the action itself, or should it be the consequence of those actions? And under this particular theory, you have ideas such as Kantianism, which is Immanuel Kant, natural rights, which a lot of people will be kind of familiar with. Yep, yes. John Locke and Robert Nozick. Contractualism, which is an individual named John Rawls, I apologize. And then divine command theory. Divine command theory, which will actually tie into destiny a little bit. Divine command theory is the idea that an action is right if God, air quotes on that, God has decreed it as such. So basically, this is a theory that argues that morality is determined by the handing down of a a sacred
text
command.
Or,
Right,
yeah.
right. Sacred orders, basically. There are, as you can imagine, plenty of arguments back and forth, especially focused around divine command theory. And not just against like Christianity or Judaism or any of the major religions. I mean, every religion will have apologist and non-apologist points of view on this. And the thing there is, again, you know, arguably anything can be justified if that's your only justification. And that's the problem that a lot of people have with the divine command theory. Kantianism, which is it's a much more interesting one. I'm going to focus on that one because I don't want to get in trouble with divine command theory. Kantianism is the theory that, that
I know where you're going.
is the theory that it's the motivation of the actor rather than the consequence of the action that makes the work right or wrong. So this is an idea that, so the predominant debate here is, say you do something, say you lie. Is lying wrong? In a vacuum,
do you want me to give the answer that you're looking for, or?
Well, and that's kind of the thing, right? Is like, it depends. And a lot of people would argue it depends on the situation. That is
the
not
white lie.
Right. That is not Kantianism.
Mm-hmm.
Kantianism says lying is wrong. Always tell the truth, or, you know, whatever action it is always wrong. There is no justification for it. Mm-hmm. You are intending to do a harm against another, whether that be a harm that is fatal or inconsequential. It doesn't matter. You are doing harm against another person. Mm-hmm. That is, in and of itself, a moral wrong. That is what Kantianism says. You have ideas. Let me see real quick. I want to say it's not contractualism. Consequentialism, which is a very broad theory, but basically consequentialism focuses on the outcome result as determination of morality of an action. So
the white lie in that case, if it saves
correct.
A person from the pain.
Right. But the problem there with consequentialism is that when you justify the means by the ends, it's very easy to start justifying really bad stuff. If you ever want to look at historical records of just pick your war, you're going to find one side.
World War II.
Yeah, that's a pretty bad one. And that was bad on a lot of different sides, right? I mean,
right.
No one has the clean hands in this situation. But consequentialism will be the people who are like, the ends justify the means. Depending on the type of leader that you have, and they're kind of pulling back into, let's look at Destiny real quick. You know, depending on, you know, if I don't really think any of our particular powerful leaders in Destiny are consequentialists. Gosh, I cannot say that word. I think the
Speaker was kind of like divine right aspect.
Yeah, Speaker was more divine command, and even he was actually more of a Kantianism, because he was very, very allocentric in the sense that he was all about protecting the other. So you have a concept, you have a dyad of egocentrism versus allocentrism. This concept is basically the idea of selfishness versus selflessness, which is a very, very oversimplification of that. But egocentrical is someone who is focused on themselves predominantly, not necessarily unhealthily or not necessarily bad, but they focus on themselves first. Allocentric is a person who focuses on the other, which is a term that you hear a lot in philosophy, especially modern philosophy, when you discuss things that are not internal. So the external person. There's a lot of talk about how if you focus on the other, you know, that is a more allocentric, that's not, and that in the same vein, that's not always a good thing. That can be a bad thing. If you focus on the other too much, you can start losing, it can become unhealthy in the same way that if you focus on yourself too much, that becomes unhealthy, right? There's a danger of narcissism if you focus on yourself too much. There's a danger of self neglect if you focus on the other too much. So there's a very
self-deprecation, self-sabotage.
Correct. Though I mean, I don't know if well, yeah, I guess you could do that. But like there's a fine line, right, between those two. So those are really there's virtue ethics, which is your Aristotelian and Thomas Aquinas. So virtue ethics are going to be more like focus on the inherent character rather than actions. So like your idea of it kind of enters into a little bit of a loophole, because it's like the argument of like, are you a good person or are you a bad person? Well, when you're dealing with morality, the entire point is the action a good thing or a bad thing? So it's subjective if you're a good person or a bad. Like it's that particular one is a very early school. There's still some thoughts around virtue ethics, but the overarching idea of virtue ethics is going to be focusing on the character rather than the action. Then we have the deontology, which is focusing on the decisions. Basically, deontology focuses on decisions being made in consideration of duty and obligation. So that's where you get like natural rights, which is the social contract idea, divine command theory. So you have the obligation to follow that. Contractualism, which is exactly what it sounds like, contracts. Kantianism, which is, we've talked about that quite a bit. Consequentialism is focusing on the outcome. So again, the ends justify the means. So you have like welfareism, intellectualism, situation ethics, egoism, all this different stuff. We also have ethics of care. Ethics of care is kind of it's also known as relational ethics. It's kind of a newer branch or newer theory. It focuses on the experience of empathy and compassion, and it's most notably, it was pretty much created by a feminist theorist by the name of Carol Gilligan. It follows a lot. It falls much heavier into psychology, the philosophy of psychology and stuff of that nature, because it's much more focused on obviously the relational, the mental well-being, and all that. There's ethics of care is a really interesting particular theory as well. And then there's pragmatic ethics, which is just really fun to research, because basically pragmatic ethics is the idea that morality is something that evolves in tandem with scientific knowledge. So you have William James, John Dewey are two of the predominant theory or thinkers.
Dewey.
Dewey. Yeah, William James is much more interesting in my mind. Dewey, I don't know. Dewey's
like your entry level. Like, I remember him from philosophy class back in the day.
Yeah. Dewey has. I don't know. Like I said, I like James, but James is also more affiliated with psychology, so that's where my interest kind of have always lied. Dewey, I want to say Dewey is.
Mm-hmm. He is.
Is the because he was. The philosophy of early education, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Because he was the one who, you continue talking on the other ones, and I will bring up his theory, because this is something I actually had to go through with early education stuff. So impact theory, all the impact theory.
Yeah, and then finally the newer one, and I don't honestly know a lot about this one, is role ethics. This theory is a theory that focuses on morality as based on the concept of family roles. I don't know a lot about that one, so I kind of was like, I saw it mentioned, and I was like, I'll put it in there, but I honestly don't know much about that particular. A lot of the contemporary deontology and contemporary normative kind of approaches they get kind of interesting. I'll say that much.
Should we
yes,
get into the comparisons in Destiny and kind of
now that everyone appreciates my madness. Yes. Let's start talking about how this all this nonsense applies to Guardians.
Are we going to go the easy spectrum of it, good, bad, and neutral, or are we going to go?
I think that's a good way to start. I don't think it's going to end that way.
Oh, no. I'm planning on bringing up a few of my own that are not listed here.
I mean, right. I mean, like, oh, man. See, like, even I don't like, because the thing is, and like, you'll notice the banner, right? Like, the reason the banner has like the blurred lines is there's no such thing as a clean division between good, bad, and neutral. Like, there isn't. It's just, that's not the way, I mean, that's not the way reality works. And that's
it's a sliding scale.
Well, and that's what I like about Bungie is the way they write their characters is that they do reflect reality. There's not like Zavala. Zavala is he's pretty good, but he's also made some really bad calls, as you do, because you're in the middle of a war. Like, there's like, and then, like Rezel.
I mean, to the extent of bad calls, though, his was based on protecting his social charge.
Right. And but what I'm saying here is that we also have to take into account, yeah. I mean, the problem with Zavala is, so like Zavala is, his focus is really the safeguarding of humanity, right? The dream of the last city. Let's just look at Zavala real quick. Zavala is obsessed with this dream of the last city, which is a very honorable thing. It's a very noble thing. However, Zavala falls into the trap of the end justifies the means and has created a prison out of the last city, as we see with Hawthorne. And the problem, that in and of itself kind of makes, I mean, I can see both sides of this debate, right? I can see why he does this, but I can also see the Hawthorns kind of having a problem with this because they were never, they never got asked. They just got shackled. And it's like, oh, well, it's for your own protection. That line has so many misuses in history that it's just ridiculous to even try to start listing them. The other problem with Zavala is that, to be completely honest, he is a extreme isolationist when it comes to military support and political diplomacy. He is like super isolationist, which is, World War I, bad thing to be because it just doesn't end well. Yeah. I think Zavala has good intentions. I think Zavala is, for the most part, a good person or a good guardian, I guess. Good guardian. But I think that there are degrees to which he is misguided. And I think that but I also see that as the reason why we have concepts such as the consensus in effect, right? Zavala is not meant to be he's not meant to be the dictator. Like that is the point of the consensus. The consensus is there to it's basically
the consensus wanted Zavala to be the leader.
Well, to be fair, one of the major players in the consensus wanted Zavala to be the monarchy.
Yeah.
But so like the thing with the consensus is that the consensus was built, really, I personally think the consensus was built to temper the Guardians, because the Guardians, for bad or worse, they are warriors, they are fighters, they are guardians. They don't think about the day-to-day life. And that's what the consensus, which is also the faction leaders, the great factions, that's why they exist, is because they bring that information to the table where they sit down, and they sit down with the speaker, the vanguard, which even in the vanguard, you see a give and take between Zavala, Ikora, and until recently Cade. Those three balanced each other out. So now that Cade's gone, we see this unbalancing, and the speaker's gone as well. We see an unbalancing of this organization that really was, for the most part, working pretty well in tandem. Like there were missteps, obviously, but they worked very well to balance one another out. And now we have an imbalance in there, and that's kind of where you're seeing a lot of these stress fractures, I guess would be the best word politically to say, with like, this explains why Hawthorne, is back in the city and promoting clans. She has a lot of lines about clans being guardians who are getting involved in city affairs. And that's a good thing, because that is bringing to earth these basically these demigods and making them realize that things are happening around them that they don't know about. One character, to kind of segue into that, one character that was really good about that was Saint 14. Saint 14 was a guardian of the people, and like that was what he was explained as. Saint 14 really did a good job of keeping himself grounded. But even Saint 14, made missteps, as we saw with like the webcomic, right? Saint 14 liked fighting to the point where that's how he debated things with people. So, I mean, that's again, that goes back to my point about I like how Bungie has written these characters all with their own set of flaws. Like even the quote unquote bad guys aren't 100% bad. Rezel Azir, for the longest time, he was the hero, and that's what made the tragedy of his fall into Dredge and Yor and the darkness there. That arc is what made it such a powerful narrative. Is that he was the person he was the guardian that was on high and was the morally right, and then now he fell and is doing the polar opposite. He went from the light into the darkness. Toland is also another one that, depending on your feelings of Toland, I know that a lot of people are very anti-Toland. But Toland, even so, Toland does have, or did have, some redeeming effects. Like, there were things that he did that were supposedly for the betterment. The creation of Bad Juju was all for the experiment of trying to create weapons that harnessed the power of the darkness, but didn't corrupt. Now,
unlike a weapon of sorrow. Well, unlike Thorn specifically.
Right. I mean, now I'm also saying that was the intent. The consequence, or the conclusion of the experiment, obviously was not the greatest. But the intent, like what I'm saying is, like, even the bad guardians that we see, like, I mean, even the Shadows of Yor. The Shadows of Yor have their own attempt to harness and cleanse the darkness to get that
they're trying
power.
to do it without falling into the same trap that Yor did, because they're following in his footsteps. Like, that's something we're going to get into next week with the Unmaking, right? With the fact that they're trying to figure out a way to harness that power without, like, falling prey to it, I guess is a way to say it.
I guess in my head, the way I kind of make it, the picture in my head that I have of them is that they're following the path. Like, Yor was walking a tightrope and fell off, and they're walking the same tightrope with the knowledge of where he fell off and how he fell off, and so they're trying to avoid it. They're trying to avoid it, but it's still a tightrope. Like, it's still, it's still something you're probably going to fall off.
Right. Toland, though. I mean, you have Toland, you have Yor, you have the Shadows. I know we were talking about how it's like a sliding scale, and you were talking like, hey, Toland does have redeeming qualities. Which one of the ones would you have said he fell into? Because he was doing the experiment with the good intent behind it to end the way it did, but would you call that a bad moral choice because he went in there tampering with things that could be bad? Like, I'm trying to figure out, like, how to categorize him.
But Toland, yeah, I mean, Toland's one of the ones that you see a weird confluence, right, with Toland. Like, like with Toland, I think the thing is that in his dark, broken state, he was trying to do what he thought was right. Now, the other thing with morality is that we have to also approach every conversation with the understanding that morality is really subjective.
What side of the line you're on, too.
Right. Like, personally, I think there are universal truths. I think that there is a capital T truth that is out there, that, there is a universal right and wrong. That is my personal belief. So, but I also recognize that that is not a belief that's shared by everyone. I've had conversations with people who have, I can't stand relativism, but I know people who follow relativism.
Right.
Whatever.
Can I ask you a devil's advocate question to kind of tie into this whole? Can an insane person be considered or can commit a bad act in relation from their perspective?
Well, okay, so the way you phrase that, yes, because it's from their perspective. However,
they can commit a bad act.
I'm a big advocate of perception being very important in a person's existence, right? A crazy person in their head is not crazy. They are actually the sane one, and everyone else is crazy. So a break from reality, a psychotic break, is basically where your perception of reality does not match, quote, what is real. You can't recognize what is externally occurring around you as agreed upon by the rest of society. So you experience something different, whether that be determined as a hallucination, or, a true psychotic break where you're actually damaging things. There's a lot of different flavors of psychotic breaks. Even within those psychotic breaks, arguably the individual who is undergoing that psychotic break is still in and of themselves aware of what they are doing, in reaction to what they're perceiving, which is a very weird thing to say. So a person who is having hallucinations is going to react to those hallucinations in a way that is actually logical to them, not to us. Like to us, we're like, because we don't see the hallucinations, right? We have no, I have no idea
perception
what you're saying.
It.
I mean, that's the paradigm is completely skewed there. You and I, because we are not undergoing a psychotic break, we have an agreement of what exists in reality outside of ourselves. If I look at a chair and you look at a chair, we can agree there's a chair. A person in a psychotic break sees a snake. Like there's a completely unreasonable level of difference in their perception. However, in their world, they are being logical. So the answer is double-sided. Yes, in their world, they are culpable of bad decisions, but in our reality, I find it very hard to ascribe culpability to choices made to someone who is undergoing a psychotic break.
Because they're outside of this social structure as far as their perception of the social structure.
Yeah, they're not on the radar as far as that social. I mean, it's the social construct of what is good / bad in a particular social. I mean, it's a tough thing to say, but that is why in modern society we have the tendency to want to shutter people who are having issues away, is because that's quote unquote the easy thing. And that is where, and there is some cases in which I think that is applicable. Like you don't want someone who's undergoing a break or someone who's, not perceiving things, as the rest of society, to harm themselves, right? Definitely don't want to harm themselves or others. That's definitely a big thing. But, I think to ascribe culpability on a person who is undergoing a psychotic break is doing a disservice to that person, because they are ultimately, and again, this is my personal belief, I think that they are doing the best they can in the circumstances that they're in. I know that's a long answer to the devil's advocate question, but
that's okay. Can I relate it back to where we were with
Toland?
With Toland or Rezel even, would either of those characters, in your unprofessional or professional opinion, be able to be categorized as having a psychotic break or having the break from reality, to where they in some ways would not be culpable to their own in relation to the rest of us? I guess is kind of the way
that makes sense. I think Toland probably would be more likely of the two. Okay. Just my from the little that we've seen of Toland, I think
considering he wanted to do the death song.
Well, I mean, there's that. I mean, to be fair, Dredgen wanted to kill everything and thought of himself as a hurricane. So I mean, the bar is kind of low there on which one is more sane. But I think that gets into the idea of like, okay, so there's a difference between a psychotic break and sociopaths.
Sociopath, yeah.
A sociopathic behavior is more aligned with what Dredgen kind of exists in. He sees things as sources of nourishment, really honestly, for hope and light. That's what he kind of devolves into. Toland's the quotes that we get from Toland within Destiny 2, especially within the Dreaming City, like, there is a sense in which he is still trying in some weird way to warn us about stuff. And so I find it really difficult with Toland to say that he's a sociopath. Does he have the
perceptions?
That's where I keep getting stuck.
Hung up on?
Because the Toland that we see in the Ascendant Realm within Destiny 2, I really have a feeling is, I mean, he doesn't have a body anymore, so his reality is kind of not at all normal. So I can justify in my head that he's had a psychotic break. But the Toland that we read about in the Grimoire from D1 is much more sociopathic, right? Like he's much more, he's going to sacrifice his fire team to go get this stupid song. He drags Ariana pretty much to the altar to sacrifice her to get the death song.
I mean, he invites her there. He
encourages her to go there.
Dragging her's a little strong.
I just keep getting the sense of like he calls her a tin can, basically.
Right.
I mean, and that shows the complexity of his character, right? It definitely. But then again, he was also known as Toland the Shattered.
Right.
So
was he actually saying at that point?
Yeah. Was he all there to begin with? I don't know. And the same thing with Rezel. It's like, and the other thing that you have to take into consideration for these two is that you have an external source that is known to cause madness, right? You have the worms and the whispering hive and all this stuff. Even the shadows mention this, and we'll get into this in the next week. But like when they find Rezel's ship, it is made of the bones, and they are assaulted by the whispers that start driving them mad, even just stepping foot on his ship. So there's a question there of, are they actually sociopaths, or are they just victims? Are they literally victims of their own, search for truth or search for whatever it is? Rezel was very proud. Rezel was very, very aware of how powerful he was as a Titan. He was very aware of the powers that he had both politically and physically. And so because of that pride, he went searching for, challenges on the moon. That led to Sorrow's Road. Like, I'm not saying that he is not culpable for making the bad decision that led to the consequence, but once that external corruption was set in, I think that's where culpability starts getting a little bit gray, because as Dredgen Yor, you see Dredgen Yor, even at the depths of his actions, in some way protecting the name of Rezel Azir. He refuses to be acknowledged by Rezel. We see that in the ghost fragments where he basically yells at his ghost to not call him. And he said, I can't remember the exact quote, but he makes the comment about, if you let them know that I am that man, everything that he has done will fall apart. He takes on a different name. So in this weird way, Yor is protecting Rezel. And so because of that, I find it really difficult to say Yor was completely aware of what he was doing. Yes, but Yor was also still trying to protect this beacon of hope that he had been. And because of that choice, that's also why I kind of go back and forth on whether or not he really was willing to do a fight with Shin, or if he let Shin kill him. I believe when I mentioned that to John, he kind of was like, no, Shin's just really fast. Like, it's like, there was kind of I don't think that was the intent, but I definitely read a part of that story as Dredgen Yor kind of letting Shin walk away. because he knew what was going on. And that flavors that story, that flavors that character's morality and their choices within that story, because if that was the case, then Dredgen Yor is actually a victim. He's not the perpetrator of all. I mean, he is a perpetrator of all this terrible deeds, but it's because the cause of those terrible deeds is not 100% on his shoulders. Toland, I don't know. Like, without knowing the story of Toland, when did he actually get obsessed with the Hive? Before. Right. And we knew that he was in exile even before the fire team. So, but why? What was going on with him? Was he already involved with, the whispers of the corruption? Like there's so many questions that are not answered for Toland that would also flavor the answer of, is Toland a bad person, or is he just a victim and he's a vessel of a darkness that is not of his own?
Should we go to, Toland and just the morality of those two in general? Toland and Yor can go for an entire episode easily.
Sunbreakers. Oh man, Sunbreakers are like deontology. Like, oh my gosh, they're mercenaries. Like they are 100% focused on them, a Sunbreaker protects the Sunbreakers. They are loyal to the Sunbreakers. Like that's their orchestrating mentality. Interestingly enough, I kind of get the feeling that entire loyalty to themselves was kind of actually forced upon them when they weren't allowed in the city. These are the Titans who roam the wilds before the city and who have never, allegedly never stepped foot into the city until our guardians, brokered a tenuous peace between them. But Sunbreakers are very much focused on the obligations of a contract. Every single interaction with the Sunbreakers, whether it be with Osiris, whether it be with the Vanguard, was always around a contract. There was always an agreement of what was being done by who and who was responsible for it, and they always upheld their end of the bargain. They were very mercenary-like.
Right.
That being said, again, we know that they have a very powerful sense of honor. I don't know their honor code. Like I don't know the code that they are adhered to.
Right. They didn't
so
I
couldn't tell you my thoughts on the morality of that code. If it's anything like, the code of chivalry, then obviously that seems like a pretty good code. There's a few things that are kind of odd in it, but it's for the most part pretty good. As far as the information that we have about the Sunbreakers, they are very loyal to Sunbreakers. They don't, as far as we know, they have not rescinded on any contracts dishonorably. To be honest, I firmly put them in a neutral position because I said, I don't have enough information to say, oh, these are good guys.
Right.
Because they are mercenaries.
Even with Saint 14, and like you listed the Iron Lords and Ladies.
Yeah.
There's not enough information that we have on really either of those two to definitively say that they were good.
Yeah, I'll go for it.
Sort of. Like Saint 14, we have a lot of stories that are from other people that Saint was good. Saint was held up. Well, so was Rizal Azir before he fell. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to be able to say that they were good people or they were morally right or morally good.
Right. And the reason I kind of lump the Lords of Iron into the air quote good camp was because of the context in which they were rising against.
Right. Even Drifter
about that one. So
even Drifters, like they were always goody two shoes type. Like there's a idle dialogue voice line where he talks about that.
And I mean that's mostly around like Radagast, right?
Right.
Saladin.
Not Felwinter.
What?
Not
enough.
Felwinter.
Not enough information. Not enough information.
He was drugged. He was coerced by the rest of them.
I'm not going to argue with that because that is accurate. But at the same time, he didn't have to be coerced. Like there are a lot of warlords that they went to talk to that ended up not joining them, and it's like, I don't know. Fellwinter, I think I don't feel comfortable really ascribing Fellwinter to anything other than undecided in my book right now, because we don't have, I mean, we have that really weird entry from Winter's Guile that I still don't really understand what's going on in it. Because he doesn't trust his ghost, and there's a huge, like, Fellwinter's a very interesting character. I'm going to say that. I'm very interested to see where his story goes. We know the end. We know the ending of it, but we don't really understand anything about the beginning, or even have really any information about the middle. I'm actually kind of excited to see what happens with Fellwinter, because there's a lot of potential with Fellwinter to be used to clarify a lot of things. I see Fellwinter as a really big potential from the storytelling perspective. Mostly because of what we saw within Winter's Guile, and then also with his interactions with is it Kaitan? I can't remember how you pronounce his name. The warlord, Saitan, or whatever.
Right.
The warlord that he guns down. There's a lot of comments on both sides that hint at a deeper story there. So it's definitely a thread that I'm really interested in seeing where they take that particular one, if they take it anywhere. I think there's a lot of potential there.
Can we dive into our own Guardian? We've talked about NPCs quite a bit, but what about our Guardian? And granted, personally, headcanon, I would like to make my own decisions, and that's something I mentioned in the summary at the beginning of the episode, is just like, we don't have actual control over our own moral obligations at this point. So you don't have that real freedom with that. But where do we lie on the morality at this point?
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, so this is the problem with an MMO, right? I know Destiny's not really an MMO, but it kind of is. And the introduction of things such as titles really highlights, I think, the disparity here. Because, for example, my Guardian, for reasons both in and out of game, doesn't have the title Dredgen. I just, there's reasons outside of game why it doesn't have it. And also, even in game, I don't want my character to have that title. I don't agree with that title. But in the confines of a video game world, does that matter? It depends on if we see this coming down the pipe, and down once the next season starts. Does that change anything? Does our characters have the ability to have that affect other characters' reactions to our character? If that's the case, then sure. I mean, I think that would be giving players a bit of control over their destiny, if you will. But then again, there's events that we've chosen or not chosen to do, the slaying of gods. We didn't really choose to do it as far as like players. We didn't choose to go in there. That was a very linear storytelling. That's the confines of a video game, is that it's ultimately very linear. Even the most open world video game has a linear story.
Right.
Now, that being said, there are options within certain types of games. Obviously, like Bethesda has a lot of games. Skyrim, Oblivion, the Elder Scrolls does a very good job of portraying like the moral compass, the karma system. A lot of games are starting to incorporate that. So it depends. I mean, I think right now our character is in a gray area. That's the way that in lore we have been described, especially by Shin, with Letters of the Renegade, or Letters from a Renegade. He describes us as characters who've actually helped break his view of the world as a black and white thing, that we are heroes with a shade of villain in us. And so I think if you're talking about in game lore, I believe that our character is fulfilling the role of a third path that is neither light nor darkness, good nor evil.
Ironically, it's something that Shin talks about in Letters of a Renegade, of having somebody who can walk that fine line between the two. And
right.
Drifter also talks about it a little bit.
Osiris, the parables of the offspring, which is not Osiris, it's Crazy Vance, but
Yeah.
they talk about it. Saint 14 has mentions of it. I mean, like, a lot of the powerful figures will have mentions of like dabbling in the darkness or dabbling in the light. I mean, that actually honestly really makes me kind of excited to see what they do with that, because with as much focus as they have right now on symmetry in game, I keep going back to, I want to see a character from the darkness come into the light.
Right.
I think that would be an amazing...
Mithrax!
I don't consider the Fallen necessarily in the darkness. I'm talking Hive. I'm talking like a Hive character who comes to the light. We've seen a Guardian fall to the darkness. I don't understand why we couldn't see the opposite happen. Especially if symmetry is actually a thing that they're going with, which, we could see. I don't know what they're going to be doing with the pyramid ships. There's a lot of potential there, though, that if they choose to double down on the symmetry thing, there's a lot of really cool effect or really cool story arcs that could happen because of that.
Right. Ooh, Trigger threw in Teox. Whether or not Teox.
Yeah, I know.
So
I'll be honest. My personal, I had for the longest time, my personal theory about Nokris was that the reason why he wasn't mentioned in the Hive archives was because he had betrayed the Hive and joined the Light. Sadly, that did not happen, but I still think it would have been a fun.
Mm-hmm. So do we have? Let's see. We have discussions of purpose of the Vanguard mentors, purpose of ghosts, purpose of speakers. How does that relate to the morality? You wrote all these notes in, and I'm actually at a loss of what you mean by these guys in particular.
So this kind of goes into the debate of, are morals a taught thing, or are they an inherently understood thing, right? Obviously, I think that there is a degree of morality that is intrinsically present in a person. But I think a large part of the moral codes that we see in reality, and even in games too, are very driven by interactions with people of power, figures in power, such as the Vanguard mentors. There's a reason they're called mentors, is because... And this was very much more, I think I got the feeling this was much more prevalent in D1 than it has been in D2. But the Vanguard mentors were really there to help bring in and show new Guardians how to use their powers. There's a line from Ikora within the Stormcaller quest from D1 in which she calls this out, and she says that our Guardian has now surpassed, her ability to comfortably teach us.
Right.
And that is something that makes her nervous about our Guardian, because our Guardian, for all reasonable intents, is very young compared to Ikora, Osiris, Tola. The other characters who have achieved the level of power that our Guardian has achieved in such a short time was very unnerving to her. But the other thing is that the mentors are there to not just guide, not just to order us what to do, right? It's not just a military commander or a snarky, sarcastic, best friend who's in the tower. They're there to show us how to interact with the world around us. And inside the lore of the game, that is much more prevalent than inside the game world. The game world, really, that is kind of what they are. They're there to kind of fill in the quiet spots and give us a purpose to come back day to day. In the lore, though, if you look, and especially with like Andal Brask and all these characters, we see the interaction between Cade and excuse me, God, I just blanked on Shiro.
Sure.
When Shiro, Cade, and Andal are broken up after Andal goes to become a Vanguard.
Oh my gosh!
Like you see the falling out of them, because and that's partially because the hunters are notoriously very difficult for Vanguard. That's the entire point of having the dare, is to trap a hunter into being a Vanguard. But that's why with Cade, for example, Cade and Tevis is actually one of those characters or figures that Cade relies on to teach hunters how to do things. There's a lot of comments about that. There's another character, and I just blanked on her name, who's another hunter who does a lot of teaching of in the wild how to do things for younger hunters. Oh my
God. I know who you're thinking. I'm going to get killed.
Ani, I can't remember. It's basically, I think if I remember correctly, it's like, I want to say it's Sumerian for teacher or something. I can't remember the language. But she's an instructor that also has comments similar to Tevis. But that's the entire thing, is that they are there to kind of guide us in our early days and show us and mentor us. That is why we call them Vanguard mentors. As far as the ghost, we definitely have that on the pole. But I think that the ghost is a much more intimate form of, the mentors. I feel like that is, they are there.
The other thing is the ghost they don't provide you a moral structure necessarily. I don't know. There's no
I think that depends on the ghost though, too, right?
You think? Because
I get the feeling that I think so. I get the feeling.
I really can't see pulled pork saying too much.
Which is why I said I think it depends on the ghost. I know pulled pork is a beacon of moral strength, but
and our ghost, he will try to say things every once in a while, I guess.
Well, I think there's also a balance there too, because ultimately, to be blunt, what is the ghost like? What are they able to do short of just refusing to resurrect them? Which, I mean, to be fair, there have been ghosts who do that. They're like, the ghost with the warlord, who just basically was like, finally, like, okay, look, you're not listening. I'm not resurrecting you. I'm not continuing this.
Right.
So there is a point at which the ghost does have ultimately the power to kind of be like, all right, look, you know what? Enough's enough. But then on the flip side, you have the ghost of like Dredge and Yor, who was constantly there and constantly supported it throughout all the travesties that he'd performed. And it actually took Dredge and threatening to kill it to drive it away.
Right.
And then, purpose of the speaker and the consensus. I think we kind of talked about that with Zavala when we were talking about Zavala, right? I view them as ways to temper the I think enthusiasm would probably be the best word. The enthusiasm of the Guardians, because Guardians, we see that with the Owl Sector. The Owl Sector, when they're trying to quarantine the Guardians, they're like, they throw things and they're really strong. Like, the poor Owl Sector civilians are like, we can't. Or they're trying to quarantine all the Guardians who are getting the motes, who are getting infected. And like, they broke stuff and they're trying to, like, they're threatening us. And so I view the consensus really as the tempering, like the human side to the control of the city. And then the speaker really as the way I kind of get it, or the way my brain kind of reads it, is that the speaker is really the first among equals, I guess, if you would, within the consensus. So you had the great factions, which brought the human side. You had the three Vanguard, which brought the Guardian side. And then you had the speaker, who kind of spoke for, the final break, because there's 3, and then 7.
Okay. I really want to do a, not necessarily a morality, but kind of a continuation of this episode from a different perspective, from the Hive and the Fallen, and obviously not the Vex, because the Vex are kind of their own.
Yeah, I mean we could. There's a logic there. The Vex are much more, as far as we know with the Vex right now, right? That's the thing with the Vex, is like there's the base program is not really familiar. We're not familiar with their base program.
Right.
There's too much unknown about their origins that could really flavor a conversation of morality.
Mm-hmm. But an episode or at least maybe a Let's Chat on the enemies.
Yeah.
Enemy races, and kind of talk about the morality.
The Hive alone
would be fascinating. I'd love to go into that one.
Because, in the same way that, to be fair, the Hive, in their own way, it's a broken system as far as morality goes, but there is a logic to it. And I think that's the ingenuity of really Seth in his writing of Books of Sorrow is that he captures really well the alienness of the hive. Because the thing is like everything that we've talked about right now is human. It's
not even awoken, because awoken is their own thing too.
Right. But I mean, to be fair, even the awoken some will take some of the morality from humanity. Like they do borrow some of it, but they also have their own. I mean, that's definitely the case. And I think it's interesting to the danger is you can't really ascribe human morals to a alien race, and I think that's the beauty of what the Books of Sorrows really did, right, was it showed the tragedy that occurred to the krill and then the hive, but then the complacency, or at least in our minds, the complacency of the subsequent generations of hive. Whereas, like, if that's all it's like ascribing, me as an American, I can't speak to someone who's from a third world country. Like the morals are socially and culturally going to be very dependent upon the individual who is perceiving that particular case. A person who has never lived in a war-torn area will not be able to understand the hierarchy of needs that the person who lives in their paradigm, their world is completely and utterly different. It's night and day difference. Sorry. And that, that's where you kind of get into the debate for the psychology of the hierarchy of needs. Someone who's on the very low end of those or the base, the foundation of the hierarchy of needs, safety, security, food, water, they're not cared about self-actualization, which is where a lot of the first world countries will be. Self-actualization is like the high, hey, I don't need to worry about where my food's coming from tomorrow, and I don't need to worry that someone's going to randomly come into my city and shoot me, because that doesn't happen in our world. But, and the air quotes around world there, because when I say world, that means our society. Right. Other societies, other worlds, that is a common occurrence. And so their entire sense of morals is going to be more reflective of that. And so with regards to like the hive, I mean, even like, kind of talking about the worlds of Destiny, like you have a distinction even in humanity between the Risen and the Warlords, the Iron Lords and the city and the current age. There's a kind of the three eras, I would argue, are really easy to differentiate between, because with the Risen and the Warlords, you have a morality based around a very, very primal, very, very might is right sense. You have people who are being reborn with the abilities of demigods who are effectively immortal. And there's not a lot of surprise in my brain that humanity is going to gravitate towards, no, I have the ability to tell you what to do. That's something that is very not surprising given the historical nature of humans. But then, in that sense, you also then get, so there's a egocentrical, individualistic world of the Risen and the Warlords, but then all of a sudden you see the branching into the Iron Lords and the early city, and this idea of community and the strength in numbers, the pack mentality. And in the same way that the Guardians today in the game operate within fire teams because you are stronger in a group, the Iron Lords are able to take on the Warlords. And that's, you see that happen. The best example is the face-off between Sagoth and Saladin, Perun, and I believe it was Radagast. The three of them were able to hold him down because they were able to resurrect each other behind their shields, whereas he only had himself. Or I think he might have had some other Guardian or some other Risen, but like they were not working in tandem like the Iron Lords were. And so because they cooperated, because they worked in tandem, because they worked, together, they were able to overthrow those who ruled through fear because they ruled in cooperation. And that kind of blossomed into the city age, which is, the building of the city, all this other stuff. And then that city age eventually led to what was called the Age of Triumph. Then the Age of Triumph, we had the entire incident at the beginning of Destiny 2, and that's where we kind of are now. So, the transformation of moral codes, though, can be also very easily seen there. You have a metamorphosis of a society that believes that the warlords are, they're obviously the kings. Like, that's just divine command theory, if you really want to go there. And I mean, I could totally see some of those warlords being that, doing that. That's fine. That gives them power. But then you have the Iron Lords who then come in and are like, we are the same, but we are not going to lord it over you. We are going to guard them. Our duty is to protect these people, not subject these people. And then you have figures like Rezel, Saladin, and all these characters who are Shax and Zavala, who are in around that area. They start forming into, and then of course you have humanity, which humanity is a political animal. So once you get them into a city, you have the faction wars, and that's where the kind of the formalization of like, no, guardians do not get involved in human affairs. Like that's kind of where that kind of sense gets put in there, which is where you get the consensus is, the division between guardians and humanities, I think, were so severe that they had to have the consensus to allow that bridge to still exist. But yes, I don't know if that answers the question.
It definitely, I think it definitely gives us food for thought. I don't know. It's hard to answer these kind of questions, I think.
Well, I think these are understandably ongoing debates that should be ongoing debates, right? I don't think there is an answer to the question, but the answer does not. The answer is just another question, which is that going back to, that's the whole point of ethics, is it's a school of philosophy. Like,
right.
If you don't know that by now, philosophy is all about answering a question with a question. And it's not like to drive it in a circle. It's hopefully to whittle it down and kind of get a clearer picture of stuff. But I mean, morality is a tough thing to define, because there's so many nuanced so going back to like the Toland and Rezel conversation, right? Mm-hmm. A new piece of information can be given to us as archivists, if you want to call us that, that completely changes the tone of those characters. Like, you could be, if they come out tomorrow and they say, no, Dredgen Yor in the showdown on Dwindler's Ridge actively chose to let Shin shoot him. That changes the entire story of Dredgen. That completely turns a lot of things on its head. Because that indicates that he was full of sorrow himself. He was a victim. Or they could come out and say, Toland knows exactly what he's doing. They're not going to, but they could come out and they could say something that simple, and it changes everything. Toland is 100% aware of what's going on. Well, now he's just a sociopathic a-hole, which again changes our interpretation. The Sunbreakers could be all of a sudden, I don't know, like in allegiance with the Cabal, or there's some crazy stuff that they could be doing that completely changes our perception of them. And that's both the fun and the infuriating thing of morality, is that it's not a black and white thing. It completely depends on the situation.
Right. And I think that's the whole point of the way they write these stories, though, to kind of showcase that it is not always going to be black and white.
Right. And I think that's to kind of break the fourth wall, even more so. I think that's where a lot of frustration comes from, is because if you aren't poring over every single word very carefully, which, I mean, even I get surprised sometimes because I'll miss something. But like, if you don't approach it with that adaptable sense of, this is an evolving story that is not static, then then any surprise is naturally going to be very shocking. and a natural development of a character might seem as a retcon when really it's nothing more than a clarification that is in line with their entire personality. To be fair, there are things that go on in reality with people who we think we know very well that you have no idea.
Right.
No one knows what's going on in another person's head. And so if you approach a fictional world in the same sense that you approach, to a degree, a real world individual, I think that you're going to have a lot more patience, maybe, for the sudden changes that sometimes we see, like the whole Rizal Azir thing. That still cracks me up. But like that whole thing, I think that surprise was definitely there, but people's reaction to the surprise, I think, was where that adaptability really shone through.
Definitely. Do we have any dispatches for this week?
I do not have any dispatches for this. I was afraid that I would not be able to stop talk about the branches of ethics.
It's okay. It is a nice introduction for anybody who has never taken philosophy or ethics, because these both kind of tie into each other a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said at the beginning, like the difficult thing with morality and ethics is that they're so tightly intertwined. I guess the easy, like kind of like we said up at the top of the show, the easiest way to look at it is morality is the thing and ethics is the attempt to explain the thing, which probably is about as clear as mud to anybody who is not used to that type of statement.
Okay.
I apologize. I was trying to think of an easy way of saying it, but it's like, I mean, so ethics is trying to explain morality, right? But morality is an action right or wrong? Ethics is trying to understand those questions that lead us to understanding if something's right or wrong.
I think that's a good wrap up of that. I think that's, as much as you can.
I mean, like, yeah, no, I agree. It's a bit of a loop to go through. It's really, right. I mean, defining ethics and defining morality without like crossing streams is really difficult because it's not really possible.
Okay. Yeah, that is. Oh man, these episodes always make my head spin a little bit. I will tell you that. I love them. I love talking about the character choices, but I'm also like, oh my gosh, it is not black and white, and it never is black and white. So, Blue.
Shoutouts. Do you have any?
There is a stream coming up for Saint 14 Project. I can't remember the date. Let me see if I can find it real quick. That is my only shout out, I believe, next weekend. So the weekend of the 23rd, they are going to be doing a charity stream. So if you guys could keep your ears low to the ground to kind of hop in there and help those guys out. They do a lot of these charity streams for mental health, since we talked about that a little bit during this episode, which is great. And so if you guys would hop in there and give them your support, even if you don't like donate or whatnot, just definitely go say hi, go watch the stream a little bit. And I think that will be my shout out for this week.
Awesome. And really just a big shout out to the live chat. Again, we really appreciate you guys. We had a bit of technical issues on this one, and I just appreciate you guys' patience and being adaptable, I guess, if you will, to dealing with that. Yay, Discord. But yeah, so I guess it's a pretty short shout out. Actually, it's a shorter episode too. I'm surprised that it was a shorter episode.
You did good.
I talked really fast.
You get a cookie. Play this at half speed, everybody, so you can digest it as you're listening.
Play it at half speed. Normally you play it at double speed, but this one you might want. No, so we'll probably stick around for a little bit of an after show, and then we'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
With that, we'll begin to wrap the chat up. Thank you again to those over on Twitch for coming to spend your evening with us. If you'd like to join us for the live streaming of the episodes, please be sure to give us a follow over on twitch.tv/focusedfirechat. Links to all our episode archives can also be found at www.focusedfirechat.com. Please be sure to email us at focusedfirechat@gmail.com with any comments or questions for our team concerning the podcast, and let us know how we're doing by giving us some feedback and a rating over on iTunes as well. Also, be sure to check out all the amazing work being featured over on thelorenetwork.com. So until next time, focus your fire, and may your light shine bright.